Welcome to Between Two Stops, your ultimate podcast for diving into the latest trends and topics in the pool service industry, bringing you insightful conversations with the best and brightest industry experts, inspiring stories from successful business owners, and educational insights to enhance your skills and knowledge. Buckle up. Between Two Stops by Skimmer starts now.
Welcome. I am Nikki Acosta. Welcome to Between Two Stops, and I'm pretty excited about today's guest, Joe Mishik out of Arizona with Painless Pool Care. And Joe, I met Joe, I guess, a couple years ago, and found that you were actually customer number one at Skimmer.
Yeah.
And I just looked you up. Our CRM doesn't go that far back, but I looked in our billing system and I found that your first invoice was paid in June of 2015, before Skimmer was even launched. So really cool to have you on, Joe. For those of you who,
I'm happy to be on.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Joe was instrumental in helping us get the Orenda calculator built into the Skimmer app. And he is a bona fide chemistry nerd. And I say that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
The best way possible. So what we wanted to talk about today, Joe, first tell us about your pool journey.
So let's see. I've been in the pool industry about 26 years now, maybe 27. I started in my senior year of high school, so 1999, and we're 2026 now, so 27 years, I guess. It's been a long journey. If we kind of fast forward, I was very much like everybody else out there when I first started. But I was gradually transitioning with the phones and the way technology was evolving to, we had the first iPhone in 2007 or something like that. And then after the advent of the smartphone, then these apps started popping up. And I think the first one that I was on was Pro Edge with Jandy. And I was with that one for a while. And then I ran into a guy by the name of Ethan. Can't think of his last name, but he's like, "Hey man, I want to build an app." And he's like, "I got a buddy from my church that he's going to help me develop it." And that was Ron Hash, which those that have been on Skimmer have heard of him. So yeah, we were the first. I met up with those guys at a Red Robin multiple times. And we were just discussing literally on paper, how this thing was going to look. One of the big things that I know Ron and I both talked about, one of the things he wanted to do was basically everything before apps was just, books. I mean, I think there's still guys out there that use books and cardstock paper and binders and all that kind of stuff. And that's how everything was charted, right? Well, none of that was able to be basically the thought of this outside of invoicing, outside of, route stops and all that kind of other stuff, was being able to hold on to this data, right? Have this data be something you could look back on. And actually putting the data into the book was always like a pen, pencil, that sort of thing. So Ron wanted that to be quicker than what you could put into a book. And so that's why a lot of the features on Skimmer, they're very much like a very quick ad sometimes, but also just that user-friendly feel that, Apple users have. So a lot of that was basically after the iPhone had come out for quite a few years at that point. But then, because I think it must have been 2014 and then early 2015 before the app, I think, was first launched. Was when I was involved. So, I mean, we had just started talking about it. They had already started doing a lot of the kind of the mainframe building of it, but really the look and the feel and the things that they wanted added. I think one of the things that I think I pushed for was having on the account route for the day, you have a time dial where you can see how long your route's taking. And that was just something that for me, I've had employees in the past, but I also like to know when I'm going to get done. It's not so much of a rush factor as it is hey, maybe I can get one more stop in, maybe I can get a repair in, maybe I can get a filter clean in. and it kind of set your timetable for you. So a lot of those features that you see in Skimmer was from day one, and I'm glad that they're still there. And obviously everything else that's kind of followed after that.
Yeah,
So,
thank you for that. We like to pride ourselves at Skimmer on making sure that the app can be used with one hand. Like it
mhm,
should be fast, it should be easy, and so that kind of background uh, kind of has set, I think, the precedence for kind of where we are today. It's very
yeah,
much a part of our DNA. So Joe, one thing that as we were talking before we got started, that kind of sets you apart, I would say, from some of your competitors and allows you to charge a premium price is that you are really deep into chemistry and into LSI in particular. And so
mhm,
I'd love to know kind of your journey into how you got so deeply interested in chemistry and LSI in particular. And for those of our listeners who aren't using LSI as a way to balance pools, why you feel it's so important.
yeah. No, that's great. I always so for probably for about 10 to 15 years at the beginning of my career, it was the test strips and acid tabs, liquid chlorine, just trying to keep a pool at a certain parts per million, just kind of that old range chemistry tactic. But I always felt like stuff was, not to use like the Matrix as an example, but I felt like there was something that was happening to my pools that I couldn't explain, right? There's just something that I could put my finger on it, but stuff, you know, chemicals were drifting, things were harder to keep in balance. And the guys that I started with that are, some have passed now, but the older generation, the good old boys, if you will, back in the day, they just had like their tactics of like how to handle those situations. And, that's probably all they knew, to be completely honest. So the LSI was, as most people know, is just a long algorithmic equation that was created by Wilfred Langelier, I think is his name, Wilfred, something like that. But it was something that they, I think in the, what is it, the CPO course, they teach about the LSI, but it's like one page. There's a few problems in the back. Maybe it's a few pages, but as far as a book being a half an inch thick, it wasn't very many pages. And it was kind of one of these things that was taught at this, like in the CPO. And this was like mid 2000s, 2010, 2015, something like that, where they're just like, oh, just use it on a pool that you have trouble with. And I was like, that seems weird because there's so many things that go into this equation. Why isn't this something that we're using all the time? You have water temperature in there, you have pH and alkalinity, which change daily, So, um, to give a throwback to Harold Evans, the original owner of Arenda, he would come out to Phoenix promoting Arenda, and he was the big proponent of LSI at the time. And this was before the LSI calculator that they actually ended up building was even out. So he was pushing it before they even had a calculator. And I was kind of like, I'm always one of those guys, like I said, I just could never put my finger on why certain things weren't operating the way in my pools that I wanted them to. And, Eric Knight always talks about don't control water because you'll never be able to. You got to let water kind of do its own thing and you kind of coax it in the direction that you want it to go. But that was the biggest influence was Harold. And then I actually downloaded an app, I think right after he was at one of our IPSA meetings. And I just started playing with this calculator that was already on the App Store. And then when they obviously launched theirs, then it was a bigger deal. But once I kind of started playing with it, I was like blown away. I couldn't believe just how, in fact, with IPSA in the chapter that I belonged to, we had a guy that had gone down on sick route for probably like 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. But I took over one of his pools and there was just scale everywhere. Like I actually, in none of my pools, I'd never seen a pool that looked like this. And I just couldn't believe it. It looked like somebody dropped DE in the whole bottom of the pool. It was just covered in scale.
Oof.
And I'd been around long enough to know, like, okay, let's give this thing a real shot of like, let's put the LSI to the test. And so I just started like, I mean, it was high. Like I want to say the water when I first started, well above 8, alkalinity is probably well above 120 or 30 or 40, whatever. And the calcium, I don't even know if the calcium level was very high, but there was definitely stuff on the side of the pool, which doesn't mean that there might be a lot of calcium in the water, but there's certainly a lot on the surface. So I just start doing the LSI, pushing all the values down, getting the LSI closer to negative, which is going to be more acidic. And by the time that this guy came back, I had virtually cleaned it all off the pool. And I think it was like the week or two before I was actually done servicing the pool for this sick route. The homeowner came out and she was like, "What did you do to our pool? We've never seen it look like this. And it looks perfect. It looks amazing." And they're like, "Can we hire you?" And I was like, "No, that's not the way that this works, unfortunately." And I wasn't there to steal this guy's pool. That's not my MO. I don't do that. But it told me something that I needed to know, which was, holy shit, this works, you know? And yeah, I've always implemented it. Um, Before, so I know we've kind of touched on skimmer before we started talking about this, but I left because there was an LSI and skimmer for a long period of time. And it was just something that, like, as part of my business, I had to run with. So I jumped over to like an Excel spreadsheet. Then I was with, you know, one of your competitors. And then I recently came back last year. The reason I came back was, yes, LSI was going to be a part of skimmer. And I was super excited about that. And, just a different perspective that I needed from the app that I was on. I'm really happy to be back. And it's just one of those like coming home kind of moments. But getting back to the LSI is having that as a weekly test for your pools. What it seems to do for me, and it's done this for whatever 10 years as long as I've been using the LSI, is it really dials in your chemical usage. So part of that is just not overdosing with acid. Also using, the other thing that the LSI does is it pushes the acidity or basicity of different chemicals. So for instance, like liquid chlorine is a higher pH value than, you know, like acid is, obviously is going to be low. But then there's other products such as like PR 10,000 that's also acidic. So it can actually push your LSI down. And those are things that you have to be mindful of. So just anything that you're putting in the water can affect the LSI. It's just you have to be aware of that. So, but as I started using it, it became very clear to me that a weekly look at these pools on an LSI basis was critical. And so then where that kind of, I guess we could progress in the next phase was the spin touch, which I know you guys integrated that. Um, and I'm glad that I was a part of helping you guys with that, because that's the crucial piece of this is like once you start dialing in these pools, you can have chlorine levels that are lower. You can understand the way that a lot of this chemistry works. And I'm not going to get into all that today, but the spin touch allows me to keep chemical readings that are like 1 to 2 parts per million. And good luck finding that on a test strip. So it sounds low, it sounds unachievable. I'm here to tell you that it's very achievable. There's no fear in that. Keeping these pools balanced is critical. It's all part of the game, I guess. So,
Joe, do you feel like you use fewer chemicals because you use LSI and Alamont weekly?
yeah, I do.
Does the
That's
does the
kind of a
does the chemical savings that you achieve, in your opinion, does that more than cover like the cost of the discs for the spin touch?
possibly. One of the other chemicals I'll touch on real quick, and I'm not just like, this was very political about 4 or 5 years ago. I don't think it is as political anymore, is borates. I started using borates about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's just an amazing product. It stays in the water a long time unless you drain it out. But it's one of those chemicals that buffers pH, so you're not using as much acid. it naturally kind of keeps your LSI because it buffers the rise in pH. It'll keep your pools a lot more closer to a negative LSI, thus saving you acid. That chemical's been a huge, it kind of acts like a salt too, because it's a natural algistat. So, and people, I mean, I'll even say this, it does make the water sparkle when you first put it in. I think it does, I think it keeps it over time, but like I have pools that I put it in probably well over a year and a half ago, and I still have, I think it's dropped maybe 10 parts per million from say like 50 parts per million, which is kind of what we target at our pools at. So yeah, that's a good chemical as far as, you know, reducing chemicals, at least on the acid side of the equation. Um, Other chemicals, I think the biggest thing is just knowing, I know we talked about this before we started the podcast, but like the FAC factor. I don't want to get into much detail on this because I can nerd out for hours, but the CYA, there is an equation for those of you that don't know, that if you multiply your CYA by whatever that value is, whatever the parts per million is, if you multiply it by 7.5%, that tells you how much free chlorine will combine with that level of CYA. If you're using borates, you multiply it by 5% or zero point 0.05. So those are values that tell you, okay, this is how much chlorine is going to combine with my CYA, which if you have low CYA in your water, you don't need a 6 or 7 parts per million that maybe you're trying to achieve. You know, you could be good at like 2, 3 parts per million, which is just fine.
And that's
So
2 to 3 parts per million of chlorine. Is that what you're saying?
correct. If it's low enough, that would probably be like a 30 or 40 parts per million of CYA in the pool, which is perfectly fine. You know, we try to keep our pools from getting much higher than 50, but you know, we try to dilute them in the winter time too to get so we don't go. I mean, I'm in Phoenix, so we fight this on a constant battle every summer, which is something that we talked about. But again, it's keeping low values. Again, going back to the spin touch real quick, because that is so accurate, I can see what my chlorine is doing in my water. You know, it's not like a guess. We're like a test strip. You're okay. Is this a 4, a 5, a 6, a 7? Like, where is it at? You
Same with
know?
a dealer test kit too sometimes, right? Like you
Oh
look
yeah,
and,
for
oh,
sure.
this looks pinkish and maybe it's
Yeah,
darker than this one.
you
Maybe
have
it's
no idea.
right.
And so, you know, I've talked with what is it, Rich over at Lamont. They're very good with their testing. I've run comparisons, and it's very on par with what a Taylor is pushing out. But it's also like the readings week in and week out are very accurate. I mean, I come back and the pools are like spot on with the spin touch, so there's not much drift in the results. It's very spot on. And just to give a quick like rundown on the spin touch, I use 2 discs per customer, not so, okay, I'll just explain that real quick. So I use a 203 at the beginning of the month, the first week. Most all my pools are residential. I don't do too many commercials. If you were doing a commercial, depending on how often you have to test the water, you'd probably be running a 203 disc. That 203 disc, I actually should have brought them. I should have grabbed a couple of them. I could show on camera. Um, those discs actually test the whole entire disc. And then there's a disc called the 601. We use that week 2, 3, and 4. Obviously, it's not the same disc per client, but there's essentially your first disc, the 203 will do the first week, and that does 10 parameters of the pool water. So you have TDS, free chlorine, pH, alkalinity, CYA, there's iron and copper that's in there, and then phosphate. So there's a bunch of tests in that one disc. I think I forgot total chlorine and stuff like that, but that gives you kind of the rundown. And then I use also a TDS pen that's made by Myron. It's a really good pen that's out there that also does temperature for me. So I do that at the beginning of the month, the first week, kind of sets all of my parameters. Okay. And then after that, I use the 601, and that you can actually do 3 bodies of water on one disc or 3 tests on one disc. And the 3 tests are free chlorine, pH, and alkalinity. And somebody might be going, well, why aren't you doing the rest of the tests? Well, a lot of the other results, if you're on a pool that's not being drained, obviously if it gets refilled, we're doing another 203. But those values don't change quickly over the course of, let's say, a month. Now they can, I'm not saying they won't. They usually always do change. But when we're talking about TDS that's in the thousands, it might go down 25, 50 parts, right? So CYA might change by like 5 parts if you're lucky. So those values are going to be slower. So we kind of just extrapolate those on top of our LSI the following 3 weeks. And then that's why we use the 601 for weeks 2, 3, and 4. And what's really great about that, and I think Lamont had this in mind, was we can do basically at a residential level for weekly visits. We can do 2 discs per pool per month, which is great. So that's, I think with all that, you're probably with those 2 discs, you're about $5 or $6 for the month, which isn't bad. So again, all these things kind of lead to, I think maybe if you're listening to this, you can kind of see like where you go with this. You can now sell to higher customers. You can get yourself in better, charging higher rates. You're going to be able to give a better level of service than you can if you're just, winging it with test strips or even like a, Taylor test kit. So
You, Joe, one of the other things that you've been able to do really successfully, and just to reiterate, you are a proud one puller. I checked your account; you had 76 addresses that you visited in your last billing cycle, which is a good amount of pools.
mhm,
But you have found a niche with some builders, specifically builders who call on you when they have black interior pools.
mhm.
Why is that?
So touching on, okay, so I'm out here in Phoenix and I'm kind of always thinking broader spectrum. Um, we don't have any like liner pools out here. So we have basically all dug, gunite, you know, concrete, or I'm sorry, not concrete, but like calcium uh, interior pools. So pools that are put in with, calcium carbonate, calcium hydroxide, it's a calcium based surface, right? So all of our pools, and that's also not to go back on this, but that's also what the LSI is fully encompassing. So the LSI, when you get right down to brass tacks, the bottom line of the LSI is controlling calcium. That's why I wanted to mention that. So like it's really crucial for our pools that are dug. You've got rebar, you have the substrate that's the gunite, and then you have the interior that goes on top of that. That's calcium based. That's what hardens the surface. So what happens though over time, or even at the beginning of a pool being installed, is that calcium can come out of that interior, and we try to control that the best that we can. But we actually have an ace in our pocket, right? And that's the LSI. So by controlling the LSI or even pushing the LSI maybe into the negative range, we can actually pull that calcium off of the surface. Products like SC1000 that Arenda makes, I know Natural Chemistry has a scale, chelate, that will actually help keep that scale, or I should say calcium, in solution. And that's the beauty of those products. Um, a lot of times I'll have a customer, they'll say, oh, the calcium in my pool has got to be off the chart. It's got to be super high. Look at all the calcium around the pool. And sometimes it's not. It's like 300, 400. I mean, 300 is what the MPC recommends. So you might have calcium around your pool, but that's not necessarily indicative to what's in the water. And a lot of times when we strip that off of the surface, and I'll get back to the black pools in a second, and we chelate it with a product like SC1000, now we actually are raising that calcium level in the body of the water. And that's when I tell people, if we do treat a pool, like I was just talking about this before we started the podcast, that I have a pool right now that we're doing an underwater acid wash on. And I expect the calcium hardness to go up by probably 200 parts per million, which is pretty significant. And once we have that achieved, we can then drain off like half of the pool and get ourselves back down to like, a very meaningful level. But that's kind of the key of like having a black pool. Just getting back to your point is like a lot of these builders, they'll hire somebody. They're not doing the LSI. Well, I shouldn't say it quite like that. Every pool has an LSI value. It's just whether or not you know what that is. So there's a lot of guys, I know a bunch, just a handful of guys that probably would tell a homeowner, hey, your surface is probably going to last like 10 or 12 years. And this could be varied across the country. But out here, it's just because guys probably keep the LSI super negative to where they're actually destroying the surface. It may look great its whole life. And then essentially it starts falling apart. We try to prevent that from happening. And that's where the LSI is your friend. So you can keep it a little bit into the negative to keep it clean, but you're not driving it so far that you're actually destroying that interior, if that makes sense.
Right.
So that's really the key. I've been able, like I had a builder about 3 years ago that I went out there. It was about, I want to say the pool was like 4 to 5 months old, maybe 6 months old. And they had put it in, they did an acid wash, filled it up, and it was already like, had white all over it. And it was a black, I'm trying to think of the name of the surface, but it was basically like a polished interior, like a black polished surface. It was gorgeous. It was smooth to the touch. It wasn't like Pebble Tech where it's pretty rough. And this pool was just like, I said, hey, what do I have to lose? And the guy's like, well, if you can't fix it, and they had already had a guy out, they drained it about 4 months after it was put in. He did another acid wash on it. And the problem with sometimes doing that, the reason we do no drains is we keep the pool full, we keep it hydrated. A lot of times when you drain a pool and you do an acid wash, that whole surface is going to dry relatively quickly. Like within the matter of minutes, it's starting to dry.
All that calcium behind, right? When that water
So
evaporates.
as you're hosing it off and neutralizing the surface from the acid, which is the right thing to do, right? You want to neutralize an acid wash for sure. But that water, albeit from the tap, has calcium in it. And people always think it's a lot higher than it is. It's probably about 120 to 140 parts per million. But that's enough calcium to leave behind like a cloudiness on the surface. And if it's on a black pool that you want to look jet black, it may actually look cloudy once you fill the pool back up. Because as the pool's filling slowly, like especially if you have a Baja shelf, it'll actually leave like this cloudiness behind. And it'll harden onto that surface through the, especially if it's sitting in the sun, and it'll bake on there. And then when the water fills over it, it just stays there. So you did this amazing acid wash, and then you come back and you're like, holy shit, it looks terrible, So the biggest thing is we try to do these no drain acid washes to keep the surface hydrated. We can peel it off with a process that we use and then, neutralize that. But yeah, the biggest thing is after processes like this have been done, sorry, I got ahead on myself on that one pool. Make a long story short, we actually cleaned this pool up. It was supposed to get chipped out within a week. They were just going to chip the whole entire pool out. And so we cleaned it up. I can actually send you photos, but it looked amazing. Like I actually couldn't believe it. It was one of the first ones I had done like that. And now I try to talk everybody into doing it that way because it's just so effective.
So a drainless acid wash. Insane.
Very cool. And then we use basically the Arenda calculator. You can use any kind of LSI. You can also use, there's another app that I use that's by, oh shoot, what's the chemistry guy's name that recently passed? Anyway, we use one of his apps. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. Yeah, everybody's screaming it if they're listening to it. But I use his app and we can raise, we know exactly how much sodium bicarbonate to add back to the pool to neutralize, the acidity of the water. Because that's what we do is we drop the acidity, the pH. I call it lemonade. We turn the pool into lemonade. So, but yeah, it works great. It's like a face peel for the pool.
Amazing. Very, very cool.
So,
Well, Joe, look, I know you've overcome, a ton of adversity. You shared with me, and I think you are okay with our audience knowing this, that as a child you stuttered, and that
mhm,
it took you a long time to kind of move through this disability that you had as a kid, and to see you come out of that and become just a master of your craft is so incredible. I think it takes a special kind of person to have the patience and the desire to get this deep into chemistry and to try new and novel techniques to be able to take care of pools in a way that clearly is doing you well. If it
mhm,
wasn't, I can imagine builders wouldn't be calling on you to take care of some of the most amazing pools that they built. So thank you
mhm.
so much, Joe, for joining us. Thank you for helping us with the Arenda calculator and the Lamont integration. And I know you've got tons more ideas behind it and are working with our
Yeah.
product team on that. So thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
joining us. And we'll try to find those pictures. If you want to send it to me, maybe I can keep them on file for anyone who's curious.
Let me say
Uh,
one more thing we talked about.
yeah, sure.
It'll take a minute. You had said, what is one of the things that separates you apart? And the biggest thing that I thought of, because you brought up the stuttering, was the confidence. So again, everything that we talked about, if, I love talking to guys on the phone if they have questions. I love just like a lot of guys are fearful, right? And you can't have confidence when you have fear. That's where I started when I was in my early 20s. I started with this business when I was 18. In the early 20s, I could already feel that pressure of not having the confidence to sound like I knew what I was talking about, because I really didn't know what I was talking about when I was that young.
Does any
So,
18-year-old man or woman, for that matter?
oh, they all have confidence nowadays. Trust me. They all think they do. Trust me. I got a 19 and 17-year-old stepson, so I know what that's like. Um, But no, the biggest thing is like when you get high end clients, and I have a lot of them, the majority of my clients are all like doctors, lawyers, celebrities, athletes, that kind of thing. I have the confidence to talk to them because I know what I'm talking about. And I think that goes a long way, especially if you're talking to somebody that kind of has an idea of like why they hired you. Maybe there's somebody that really knows what you do. And so they hired you because you're very high acumen. And so having the confidence to meet them where they're at, it gets your foot in the door immediately. And then everything else kind of comes with it. So, yeah, the stuttering as a kid, my mom helped me overcome that. And thankfully I did. When I get nervous, I still stutter. But really, the biggest thing is like, I never thought I would have the kind of clients that I have. Like, that never crossed my mind in a million years. But being able to talk to them, A, without stuttering, but B, with the level of confidence that I have is only because of the time that I've put into this industry and this business that I run. So, no, I'm proud of it. I kind of look at myself as boutique. A lot of guys, and that's one of the other sides of this. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but that is also part of the problem is some of these guys run big companies and they're like, how do I implement this? So I'm happy to share that. I've shared that with guys locally that have implemented this into 5, 6 man crews. And I'm happy to be a part of doing that with other guys and having that, helping other companies succeed. I love doing that. I don't, I just think that's something that is lost on this industry, or any industry is cutting other companies down. I want to build this industry up. It makes us all better. So,
Love it. Well, thank you, Joe. And for those of you who are curious, if you want to learn more about LSI, I highly, 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 highly recommend the Arenda Academy. Uh, they
mhm,
have they have a free course on their website. If you send your text to it, or if you take it yourself, there's a certificate at the end for each of the 4 pillars. But it is an incredible class. And Eric Knight is continuing to teach a lot of this out in Watershape University, and is just a wealth of knowledge. So if
mhm.
you're not sure what LSI is, or you're not sure about why it's important, or if you're not sure even where to start, Start there. It's a great way to add a level of expertise to your skill set. And
Mhm.
that can be what it takes to set you apart, just like it did for Joe.
Yep, I agree.
All
Nikki,
right.
thank you so much.
You're most welcome, Joe. I'll let you get back to work, but thank you for
All
joining
right.
us today. And if you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and come back. We've got plenty of more great episodes coming up.
Thank you, Nikki.
Between Two Stops is brought to you by Skimmer. Save time, grow revenue, and deliver a seamless customer experience with Skimmer's all-in-one pool service management platform. Get started risk-free at getskimmer.com.